Hi, welcome to the Dalhousie University Electrical Engineering PowerLab. It's where all the studies in energy conversion and power delivery take place. As you go into this room, there are hazards that you have to be aware of, and you need to treat the hazards in this room with the utmost respect. And so before entering this room, you need to know something about the space and something about the hazards that happen inside this room. Before we enter the space, you should be aware of where you are. We're in the Emera IDEA building. We're in room 2005, and the space that we are in right now is the corridor access that allows you exits in terms of fire exits or if you have to leave the building in an emergency. You also bring your attention to the emergency phone that's just down one room. And if you need to get a hold of security for any reason, you lift up that phone and you're immediately given to security.
At the Electrical Engineering PowerLab, be mindful of any signage present on doors or windows. Shown here on the door, you will find a hazard identification sign. Its purpose is to give you an indication as to what type of hazards you might face upon entering the lab and what types of personal protective equipment you may need. Please be aware that food or drink is never permitted in the lab.
All right, we're inside the power lab now and we're standing in the safety zone. The safety zone is a zone that's been identified as a zone that there are no hazards. Inside this safety zone, you'll find the equipment that you need to be safe in this lab. We find a fire extinguisher over here in case you need it. There is a first aid kit in case there's an incident or an accident. We find that the signage is here to tell you what you can and cannot bring into the lab, and we also find that there's personal protective equipment. So from time to time you will need this in the running of the various labs that happen in this space. If you're ever in this lab and there is an emergency of some sort, you need to understand that the first person you should contact is the technologist or the TA or the instructor, whoever is in charge of the lab. And if you need something that goes beyond that, the emergency numbers are on the wall around the room, and that's the Dalhousie security number, which is 494-4109, and you can call that immediately to get assistance if there is an emergency. Okay, so I've just stepped outside of the safety zone and I've entered into the hazardous space in this lab, and I bring your attention first thing to the panel that brings the power into this room. This is a 208 three-phase system, and the voltage levels in this room can reach 250 volts easily. So you have to be aware of those. The signs are on the wall that tell you that, but this is where the main power comes in, and this is the main breaker. And if you ever have to kill the power in this room, this main breaker just immediately shuts off. All right, so we're standing here in front of one of the modules that you'll be working with on a regular basis with a machine running. And if you ever run into a situation where you need the power to be off immediately, there are two emergency shut-off locations, one on that post, one on this post, and this immediately removes the power from every bench in the lab. All right, I just wanted to bring your attention to some of the hazards that you may face in a day-to-day operation of this equipment. The first hazard I bring your attention to is the idea of an exposed conductor. You don't want exposed conductors in any way, anytime. Whether they be hanging or whether they be connected like this, you never want to daisy chain conductors together because that leaves conductors that are exposed. So avoid exposed conductors at any cost. The other thing that you want to be looking at is tight connectors. If you have a wire that's too small and it's very tight, these can pop out. And if they pop out, that exposes a conductor, and you want to avoid that. All right, so not only are we often exposed to shock hazards in this lab, but we're also exposed to mechanical hazards. These machines run at 1800 RPM or faster. And when this equipment is rotating, there's a definite hazard here. That's why each of the pieces of equipment have guards, and those guards should always be in place before you ever energize any of the pieces of equipment. And so these guards fit right in here, and that stops any hazard from happening. All right? So if you're ever called upon to change the belts or work inside, make sure the power is off. The power will stop energized conductors from being in place. You'll also have to be aware that these belts provide pinch points in here that can damage fingers. At this station, I wanted to bring your attention to other hazards that are in this room. We've shown that there are exposure hazards to energized equipment. There's rotating equipment that you have to be aware of and the motion associated with that. At this station, I'll show you another one. The power is off, so I can wire at will. And so if I connect this to a wrong location and then I turn the power on, nothing happens but the breaker trips. And so no one is startled and we're fine. If I try to do this under powered conditions, so if this is live, and I make an incorrect connection, I'll probably be startled, and as a result of that being startled, I will include a tripping hazard. And so it's really, really important that while you're working with these stations, that you keep your bench as clean and uncluttered as possible. And one of the biggest problems are backpacks. And so we try to make sure that backpacks are kept inside underneath the benches so that they don't become a tripping hazard for when things happen and maybe you're startled. All right, one of the hazards that happen in this room from time to time, in particular labs that we use, is we're going to use a stroboscope. The stroboscope is used to help us determine the speed of the rotating machine. And it does that by flashing a light. So those of you that may be sensitive to flashing lights and stroboscopic effects may need to be aware that that's going to happen in just a few minutes. And in some cases that causes seizures and other adverse effects. And so in this lab, we're going to be using stroboscopes. And so if you are sensitive to that, you should make those that are in charge of the lab aware of that. But what happens is that we'll turn the strobe on and it causes a light to flash. That flashing light gives us a measurement of the speed. And as that happens, sometimes it makes the machine look like it's stationary. Regardless of whether the light is on or it's not on, you should never be touching rotating machines while they're in operation. All right, so in summary, you've seen some of the hazards that are in this room, and those hazards dictate the rules that we put in place for you to be working safely in this room. And so the rules that we use is, number one, you never work alone. You should never be in this room by yourself. There are too many hazards not to have somebody there to help you in time of need. Number two, you should never be wiring live. Loose and energized conductors are not something that should be permitted in this lab. And so therefore you should always wire when the power is off. Number three, long hair, dangling jewelry, loose sleeves, those are the kind of things that get caught in rotating equipment, and they should be tied back or removed. The equipment in this room is heavy, and if it's dropped, it could be a danger to you, and so that's why we insist on closed-toed shoes. And so there's these kind of rules that are in place. There should never ever be food or drink in this lab. These are the rules that we put in place because of the hazards that are in this lab. And finally, if there ever is an incident that you're involved in, you must report it. And so you need to do an incident report, and the website is shown on the screen. And that is for situations where there has been some sort of incident or whether there was something that came very close to being an incident. All of these things should be reported so that we can remove those from the hazards that are in this room.